Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us again, watching another episode of Tech Visionary Interviews. We are glad this time to have Andrew all the way from New York joining us. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Th-
From my point of view, you're all the way in New Zealand, but that's okay. That is sort of the New Yorker's point of view, right? Which is that the
yeah, or
center of
this
the
is
universe is right,
or
right
this
here,
is Kiwi's point of view, seeing everywhere else far away.
right?
Thank you, really appreciate you joining us. Can you introduce yourself a little bit so everyone gets familiar with who you are, what you
Yeah,
do?
sure. Well, Andrew Brust, the company is Blue Badge Insights, and the company and I are very focused on kind of everything around data and analytics and BI and AI. I've been a data guy going back, depending how you count, going back to the mid 1980s. I've been focused on business intelligence basically since Microsoft entered that world, which was kind of right around 1999. And I've been very focused on more the modern sort of open source big data analytics stuff for about 10 years. I write about big data for ZDNet. I'm their original big data person. I'm now one of three, but still kind of the head one in that cohort. And I'm also an analyst in that space for a research company called GigaOM. So between doing direct work with various companies in the industry and the stuff for ZDNet and the stuff for GigaOM, that's kind of where I am. Also, like you, I'm a Microsoft MVP, data platform MVP. I've been an MVP since 2004, and I've been in the Microsoft Regional Director program since 2002. And all the while, I'm still only 28 years old. I just got started when I was super young.
That's fantastic. Great
Yeah,
achievements. Yeah.
precocious, right?
Yeah, that's great job. And especially like your articles on ZDNet, I'm always following that, and I encourage everyone to follow Andrew's article on ZDNet, which is great. So let's jump into the topic today, which is kind of related to the things that you are also writing in your articles, like the
Right.
world of analytics is changing like so fast. Like 20 years ago, we had like totally different technologies. These days, we have different technologies. How do you see the direction of these industry is going?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's interesting, and I feel a little silly saying this to you because you already know, but the world of data and BI was very sort of set, very, the word I like to use is ossified. It was just very frozen for really about 15 years. There wasn't a lot of change. I mean, there were new versions of databases and OLAP servers and so forth every few years. But in general, we were working with the same technology stack over and over and over. And of course, that led to kind of a revolution in new innovations. The market really got kind of restless and needed new things to happen. And the incumbent vendors were getting, probably a little bit lazy and needed to be challenged. And that led to things like Apache Hadoop and lots of companies scrambling to adopt and accommodate that. And more recently, we're looking at things like Apache Spark and various machine learning platforms. And so we went from almost no change to 15 years to almost constant change for the last 10. And, at the beginning of that decade, it was all about stuff that was on premises and setting up your own clusters with commodity servers. Today, it's all about data lakes in the cloud, typically, and in cloud object storage, be it S3 on Amazon, for example, or blob storage or data lake storage on Azure. And actually, the change that I see most recently is for us to get back a little bit to the old days, so that instead of having so many vendors doing so many different things and making the change so overwhelming, things are consolidating more, so that we can get to more of a standard stack and stop having so much churn and fluctuation in the underlying tech, and so we can really focus on it. I think the machine learning stuff is the next piece of it that really has to evolve and mature and catch up to the rest of the software development world in terms of DevOps and management and so forth. So there's still a lot of activity there, but on the core analytics stack, We've now seen, the BI vendors kind of solidify, the data warehouse platforms solidify, and more we're seeing the open source analytics data lake platforms solidify as well. So I think that's a good thing. Obviously, with the pandemic, that introduces um, certain economic forces of its own that I think really makes companies say, all right, we have to triage and we have to focus on what's going to give us the most the most cost benefit. So the idea of having so many, kind of frivolous new technologies and companies, I think the tolerance for that is a bit low right now. So
Great.
we're getting to a pretty organized place. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for like that big picture explanation. In terms of like the actual technologies that are like used a lot these days, or technologies that are like at the top edge, most of them are working somehow with cloud, because when you are processing like that
Yes.
much of analytics, you need to get that working. But what is the trend that you see? Like, let's say if I'm a business owner, if I want to leverage some of the analytics features, what are the paths for me to take? What are technologies there, pros and cons of those, things like that, in a high level view?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess first of all, I would just call out like the major kind of technology pillars on the open source side at this point now. First of all, it's cloud storage, just the actual repository. It's Apache Spark, as I mentioned, Apache Kafka for event streaming, real time, fast data analytics, and then a few different competing projects for doing kind of SQL querying on top of that. A big one is Presto. Another big one is Hive. And there are a few more as well. I won't laundry list them all. So those are big, and I think everybody needs to kind of evaluate those if they haven't already, and look at how to integrate them into what they're doing. On the other hand, what I would say is, now that we're at a time where things are getting a little less hype driven and a little bit more results oriented, we've kind of come back down to earth and realized that, well, the data warehouse platforms that we've been using, those are still super important. And in fact, the cloud has really transformed them to work in lots of modern, very high data volume scenarios, as well as the ones that were a little more limited, 15 and 20 years ago. And the BI platforms that we're used to are, more relevant than ever, really. So whether you're a Microsoft ecosystem customer and you're working with Power BI, or if you're working with Tableau, those are all big. I guess another one is just doing stuff in Jupyter notebooks, and the data science world is really happy to do a lot of that work. What I would also say, though, is that, without getting too much in the weeds of the specific, underlying technologies, Kubernetes and container technology has, at first it revolutionized the software development world, which is where I was even before the BI world. But now it's really revolutionized the data world. Pretty much every vendor and every platform has pivoted to kind of work in a containerized environment and work within Kubernetes. And because each of the three major cloud providers now has a Kubernetes service, or even if they don't, you can just use their infrastructure as a service and run Kubernetes clusters on top of that. That has made it so that most of these platforms can move around between the three public clouds, as well as a private cloud, and that Kubernetes really ends up kind of leveling, or even to some extent commoditizing, the various offerings from the different cloud vendors, because it's not that it's painless, but it does allow you to mostly set up the same stuff in any of those environments, and if you wish to, move them back and forth. What I'm finding is, yes, there's a journey from on-premises to the cloud, but we're also seeing some companies bring stuff back from the cloud to on-premises, and then maybe back again, because a lot of it is around economics and where you're going to be able to best control costs and so forth. So portability is big, and most of the data vendors and most of the data technologies have oriented around this, and so we're seeing a lot of that equalization
Great.
happening now. That's a big thing. Mhm.
That's good to know. Thank you. So from, let's say, from the, again, business owner point of view, what
Mhm.
are key questions they should like ask themselves when they are thinking like which direction we should go? Like probably like cost is one of those, but like compliance, most of these are like having features that are probably like quite alike, but what they can ask themselves when they are thinking which one they should choose as a right path to go, or which
Sure. Yeah.
combination.
So yeah, there's a couple questions in there. So one is kind of which way you should go and what would the criteria be. And then, I think you were calling it out just as an example, but I think it's important all by itself is the notion of compliance and what impact that has. So in general, what I would say is that organizations should work with platforms that really best complement the skill sets they already have in-house. So most, and this was not the case 10 years ago when big data was all new. It was all about writing MapReduce code in Java and so forth. And that was kind of irrational from my point of view. And now we're at the point where actually most platforms cater to organizations with SQL skills because most organizations have SQL skills. So if you're working well with a data warehouse platform, that's great. And if you want to work with a data lake platform because you want to augment what's in the warehouse with data that is a little less formal and a little less structured, but you still want to be able to query that with SQL technology, then some of the SQL engines I mentioned, like Hive and Presto, will help you do that too. If you're in the Microsoft world, you can work with Synapse Analytics, which is super interesting because it combines the SQL data warehouse technology that is basically, SQL Server in lineage with Apache Spark, and they give you umpteen ways to query that. But one of the ways is you can use Transact SQL Server's version of SQL, to query all of it. And so that's like I think, a very concrete example uh, of what I was referring to before, which is that vendors are now helping you kind of leverage the skill sets you already have and bringing their platforms to you rather than making you kind of walk or run or trek a great distance to get to them. In terms of compliance, we're in a funny time right now because on the one hand, there's all this pressure to be data driven and to have a data culture. And I'm doing the funny air quotes on purpose because we hear it so much, it gets to be kind of a turnoff. But we have a lot of pressure to make decisions using data and to use data as much as possible and to get that to be a real kind of normal habit for everybody. On the other hand, there are very serious government regulations in Europe, in California, in lots of jurisdictions around protecting data and data privacy and the ability to delete data, and lots of regulations around processing data within the national physical boundaries from whence it originates. So how do you do that? Well, actually, lots of vendors are now getting very sensitive to that. So you'll find database vendors, CockroachDB is a good example of this, where you can have clusters in different geographic regions. You can federate them into what looks like a single database. And if necessary, you can keep specific data within specific national boundaries. And I guess what I'm saying ultimately is that the vendors are now making it so that instead of you having to do a lot of plumbing to keep the data where it needs to stay, that just becomes a feature of the platform. That's starting to happen. I think you're going to see that from other vendors as well. So this will start to be baked in. But I would say, in addition to all the other technologies and phenomena that I talked about, data governance is super important. Data catalogs are super important. And data classification so that your sensitive data can be appropriately tagged and identified. That's super important too. And there's a lot of vendors in the data catalog and data governance space, companies like Privacera, companies like Calibra, companies that we know for a long time, like Informatica. For some reason, a lot of them like to have Latin sounding names that end in the letter A. But they're all there to help us work with this strange conflict, which is use data as much as you can, but protect it and lock it down. The key to making that successful is a good data governance platform.
Great, awesome. Thank you for the good explanation, answering those questions. Uh, is there anything
Quite welcome.
else you think people should know that I haven't asked?
Oh gosh, well, we could go for hours and hours, but we try to keep this format to something reasonable for your esteemed viewers and listeners. But gosh, in general, what I would say is keep an eye on how the pandemic affects all these technologies. What we're seeing, and I'm actually paraphrasing somebody else who gave it was an embargoed briefing, so I can't give the person credit properly. Because I'd be breaking an embargo if I did that. But he made a wonderful observation, which is that before the pandemic, the ability to kind of work with customers that might be very global in their location, that with whom your interaction might be completely online, and having the technology infrastructure to do that, that was sort of a nice to have. That was something you augmented on top of your core business. So it's not that it wasn't there, but it was kind of secondary. Now with COVID and all of the quarantining and social distancing that's happened, that's actually becoming the default mode of doing business. And that has great impact actually on the way data and analytics happens, because you might have assets and infrastructure that are globally distributed, customers that are globally distributed. And that doesn't have to mean all over the world, but it might mean 3 different countries and 3 different continents, even if you're a smaller business. And so you've got to absolutely insist on platforms that can handle that, or at least that have handling that on their near-term roadmap. And so that would be my one piece of sage advice. I'm in a very kind of privileged position here because I don't have to make any of that happen. I just have to observe it and say, this is something important to keep in mind. But if that's my job, then hopefully I did it well.
Great, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the summing up that part. If our audience wants to get in touch with you, what are the best ways to contact you?
Sure. Well, bluebedgeinsights.com is the web presence, and I'm on Twitter, just simply with my first name and last name, Andrew Brust. That's spelled Brus, like Sam T, like Tom. And you can, as I said up front at the beginning, you can find my stuff on ZDNet, and there's I think in all 3 of those cases there are ways to contact me. I have a shortcut on for the ZDNet stuff that I publish. If you go to bit.ly/abrustzDNet, that will take you to my feed. So that's my first initial last name and then ZDNet, abrustzDNet, or in the English working world, English speaking world outside of the US, ZDNet.
Yeah.
But here we pronounce things funny, so we say ZDNet over here.
Great, fantastic. Thank you for your time, your insights. That was very valuable. Thank you for everyone for watching us. Until next time, stay safe. See you later.
Bye-bye. Thanks.